The ballroom doors slammed shut behind them. Lillian's wrist burned where Lord Ashford gripped it, too tight, dragging her down the hallway toward the parlor where women vanished and returned hollow-eyed. No one followed, no one ever did. She twisted hard, heels scraping marble, breath coming fast. His hand slid lower. She opened her mouth to scream, "There you are, darling." A voice like frost, a hand catching hers, yanking her backward, away. Lord Ashford stumbled. Adrian Vale, Viscount Ravenscroft, stood between them, face carved from ice and fury. "Touch my fiancée again," he said quietly, "and I'll destroy you." Lillian's heart stopped. Fiancée? But if you want to know how a lie that saved her life became the one truth worth dying for, stick around. Drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Hit that like button. You won't regret it. The music from the ballroom felt like it belonged to another world. Lillian stood frozen in the hallway. Adrian Vale's hand still wrapped around hers, Lord Ashford's face turning an alarming shade of crimson 3 feet away. Her pulse hammered so loud she couldn't hear the string quartet anymore, just the blood rushing through her ears and the low, lethal calm in Adrian's voice. "You're mistaken, Ravenscroft." Ashford's mouth twisted. "Miss Hart is no one's fiancée. She's Lady Pembroke's companion. A servant." Adrian didn't blink. "She's mine." 2 words, flat, final. Lillian's stomach dropped. She'd spoken to Adrian Vale exactly twice in her life. Once when she'd delivered a letter to him at Lady Pembroke's request, and once when she'd stepped on his foot during a crowded dinner service, and he'd looked at her like she was a stain on the carpet. He didn't know her. He certainly didn't want her. But Ashford was backing up. "I see." Ashford's gaze slid between them, sharp and suspicious. "How unexpected. Lady Pembroke said nothing. Lady Pembroke doesn't control my private affairs." Adrian's grip on Lillian's hand tightened, not painfully, but enough that she felt the tremor he was hiding. "And if I hear you've been spreading rumors about my fiancé's respectability, I'll ensure the only invitations you receive are to your own creditors' hearings." Ashford's jaw worked. For a moment, Lillian thought he might call the bluff. Because it was a bluff. It had to be. But then his eyes dropped. He adjusted his cuffs. "My apologies. I was clearly misinformed." He walked away without looking back. Lillian's knees went soft. Adrian didn't let go of her hand. He turned, tugging her further down the hallway, past a servant's alcove and into a small, dark library that smelled like leather and old smoke. He shut the door, locked it, leaned against it, and closed his eyes. "What," Lillian whispered, "was that?" "A mistake." His voice was hoarse. "Probably." She yanked her hand free. "You told Lord Ashford I'm your fiancée." "I'm aware." "Why?" He opened his eyes. In the dim light filtering through the curtains, they looked almost black, deep brown, shadowed, exhausted. "Because he was going to rape you." The word landed like a slap. Lillian flinched. "I know what Ashford does," Adrian continued, quieter now. "I know where he was taking you. And I know no one in that ballroom would have stopped him." He straightened, rubbing a hand over his face. "So I stopped him. The only way that would work." "By lying." "Yes." "And now?" "Now," Adrian said slowly, "we have a problem." Lillian had been Lady Pembroke's companion for 3 years. It was a position that meant everything and nothing. She wasn't a maid. She didn't scrub floors or empty chamber pots. But she wasn't family either. She arranged flowers, read aloud, fetched shawls, and smiled at cruel jokes. She lived in a small room on the 3rd floor, ate meals alone, and stayed silent when Lady Pembroke's friends speculated loudly about whether her mother had been a mistress or a whore. She'd learned not to answer. Silence kept you safe. But silence hadn't saved her tonight. Ashford had cornered her near the refreshment table, all charm and cold eyes. He'd asked her to fetch something from the parlor. She'd refused. He'd smiled, and then his hand had closed around her wrist. No one intervened. Lady Pembroke had been laughing with the Duchess of Harrow. The other guests had looked away. Only Adrian Vale had followed them into the hallway, and now he was pacing the library like a caged wolf, his formal coat pulled tight across his shoulders, jaw clenched hard enough to crack teeth. "You can't tell anyone," Lillian said, "about what really happened." He stopped pacing. "Excuse me?" If people find out you lied, I'm not planning to announce it in the Times. He shot her a flat look. But Ashford will talk. He always does. By tomorrow morning, half of London will know I'm engaged. We need to decide what we're going to do about it. Lillian's throat tightened. You could say it was a misunderstanding, that you were mistaken. And make you a liar. I'm already nothing. You're a viscount. You think that matters? Adrian laughed bitterly. My father gambled away half our estate before he died. My mother's health is failing. My sister needs a decent match, and the only reason she has any prospects at all is because I've kept our name clean. If I'm caught lying to cover up an affair with a servant, I'm not having an affair with you. I know that. He dragged both hands through his hair, messing the careful style. But they won't. They'll assume I ruined you, invented the engagement to avoid scandal, and then abandoned you when it became inconvenient. Your reputation will be destroyed. So will mine. So will my sister's. Lillian pressed her back against the bookshelf, trying to think. Then what do we do? Adrian went still. We, he said slowly, pretend it's real. The plan was insane. They would announce the engagement officially, appear together at social events, maintain the fiction long enough for the gossip to die down and Ashford's interest to move elsewhere. Then, in a few months, they would quietly break it off. Mutual decision, no scandal, everyone walking away unscathed. It won't work, Lillian said. It has to. You're a viscount. I'm a paid companion who doesn't even have a proper family name. No one will believe you chose me. Adrian's mouth thinned. Let me worry about that. And Lady Pembroke will be thrilled to be rid of you. That stung, even though it was probably true. Lillian wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the stays of her borrowed dress dig into her ribs. It wasn't even hers. Lady Pembroke had insisted she wear something presentable for the ball, which meant Lillian had spent the evening in a gown 2 sizes too small, holding her breath and praying nothing ripped. She'd never imagined she'd end the night pretending to be engaged to one of the most eligible men in England. What if someone asks how we met? She asked quietly. Adrian hesitated. We'll say, you were visiting a friend. We were introduced. I was taken with you immediately. That's a terrible story. Do you have a better one? She didn't. He crossed the room, stopping close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Up close, he looked older than she'd thought. Not old, but worn. Like he'd been carrying something heavy for too long. I need you to understand, he said quietly, that if we do this, there's no going back. You'll be scrutinized, judged. They'll dig into your past, question your worth, make you prove you belong. It will be brutal. And if I say no, then I'll take you somewhere safe tonight, and tomorrow I'll deal with whatever Ashford says. But you'll still be ruined, and I'll still be a liar. He paused. At least this way we control the narrative. Lillian searched his face, looking for the trap. Men didn't help women like her without wanting something, but all she saw was exhaustion and something that looked almost like regret. Why? She whispered. Why did you follow me? Adrian's jaw worked. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, because no one followed my sister. The words were so quiet she almost missed them. 2 years ago, he continued, voice tight, at a house party in Kent, a man cornered her in a hallway. She was 15. I wasn't there. No one stopped him. His hands curled into fists at his sides. She's never been the same. Lillian's chest ached. So when I saw Ashford dragging you away, Adrian finished, I didn't think. I just moved. She believed him. It was foolish, probably. Dangerous, definitely. But she believed him. All right, she said, his eyes widened. All right, I'll do it. The engagement, the pretending. She squared her shoulders, ignoring the way her hands shook. But I have conditions. Adrian blinked. Conditions. If I'm going to be your fake fiancé, I need to look the part. That means proper dresses, a lady's maid, someone to teach me which fork to use. She lifted her chin. And when this is over, I want a reference, a real one, so I can find a new position somewhere far from London. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or respect. Done, he said. They shook hands like business partners. Lillian tried to ignore how warm his palm was, how steady. Tried not to think about the fact that she'd just agreed to lie to all of London for a man she barely knew. Tried not to wonder what would happen when the lie started feeling like the truth. What? Lady Pembroke fired her the next morning. Engaged? To Ravenscroft? The older woman's face had gone an impressive shade of purple. Don't be absurd. He would never. You must have misunderstood. I didn't misunderstand, ma'am. Lillian kept her voice level, hands folded in front of her, even though her heart was trying to beat out of her chest. Lord Ravenscroft proposed last night. I accepted. You accepted? Lady Pembroke's laugh was shrill. You, a nobody with no family, no fortune, no... She stopped, eyes narrowing. Did you trap him? Did you compromise yourself deliberately? No, ma'am. Then how? The door opened. Adrian walked in without knocking, dressed in a dark gray coat and carrying a leather folder. He looked every inch the Viscount, cold, composed, untouchable. Lady Pembroke, he inclined his head, polite and distant. I've come to collect my fiancée's belongings. Lady Pembroke sputtered. Lord Ravenscroft, surely there's been some mistake. No mistake. He glanced at Lillian, and for just a second, something almost warm flickered in his eyes. Darling, have you packed? Lillian's mouth went dry. Not yet. I'll have a maid sent up. He turned back to Lady Pembroke, expression cooling again. I trust you'll provide a satisfactory reference for Miss Hart's time in your service. I most certainly will not. Adrian set the folder on the table, flipped it open. Inside were papers covered in numbers, accounts, debts, receipts. Lady Pembroke went pale. These are copies, Adrian said mildly, of your late husband's gambling debts, the ones you've been hiding from your solicitor. I acquired them from a rather enterprising clerk last month. He smiled, thin and sharp. I'm sure the courts would be fascinated to learn how you've been mismanaging your stepson's inheritance. You wouldn't... Write the reference, Adrian said softly. Or I will. 15 minutes later, Lillian was in a carriage with a hastily packed trunk, a glowing character reference, and a Viscount who looked far too pleased with himself. You blackmailed her, Lillian said faintly. I persuaded her. With evidence of fraud. Alleged fraud. Adrian leaned back against the seat, watching London roll past the window. Though between us, it's absolutely fraud. Her stepson should have her arrested. Why haven't you told him? Because I didn't care until this morning. He glanced at her. You're welcome, by the way. Lillian didn't know whether to laugh or scream. Where are we going? My mother's house. You'll stay there until the wedding. Her stomach dropped. Wedding? Fake wedding, Adrian clarified. Eventually, we'll need to stage a proper courtship first. A few months at least. Maybe longer. How much longer? Depends on how convincing we are. The carriage hit a rut. Lillian grabbed the edge of the seat, feeling the world tilt sideways. 24 hours ago, she'd been invisible. Now she was engaged to a Viscount, blackmailing aristocrats, and heading toward a life she didn't understand. I don't know how to do this, she said quietly. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly gently, neither do I. It should have been reassuring. It wasn't. Ravenscroft House was smaller than Lillian expected. Not small. It was still a London townhouse with 4 stories and more windows than she could count. But it didn't have the sprawling grandeur of the estate she'd visited with Lady Pembroke. The paint was fresh but plain. The furnishings were elegant but not extravagant. Everything felt careful, like someone was trying very hard to look wealthier than they were. Adrian's mother was waiting in the drawing room. Catherine Vale, Dowager Viscountess Ravenscroft, was a thin, pale woman with dark hair streaked with gray and eyes the same deep brown as her son's. She looked fragile, the kind of fragile that came from long illness, not delicate breeding. But when she smiled at Lillian, it was warm. So, she said, you're the girl who saved my son from a scandal. Lillian blinked. He's the one who saved me. He told me what happened. Catherine gestured to the settee. Sit, please. You look exhausted. Lillian sat. Adrian remained standing near the fireplace, arms crossed, watching them both warily. Adrian also explained, Catherine continued, That this engagement is a temporary arrangement, a fiction to protect both your reputations. Yes, ma'am. I see. Catherine folded her hands in her lap. And you agreed to this? I did. Why? The question was gentle, but Lillian heard the weight behind it. This woman was a mother, first and foremost. She wanted to know if Lillian was a threat. Because the alternative was worse, Lillian said honestly, and because your son gave me a choice when no one else did. Catherine studied her for a long moment. Then she looked at Adrian. She'll need a wardrobe, a maid, dancing lessons probably, elocution. I've already arranged for a modiste and a chaperone. Adrian's jaw tightened. Mother, if you're going to do this, you're going to do it properly. Catherine's voice sharpened. The moment someone suspects this engagement is false, you'll both be ruined. That means no unchaperoned visits, no improper behavior, nothing that could be used against you. I'm aware. Are you? Catherine's gaze was steel-wrapped in silk. Because this isn't just about your reputation, Adrian. It's about hers. And if you damage it, if you use her and discard her when this is over, I will never forgive you. The room went silent. Adrian's expression cracked, just slightly. I wouldn't do that. Swear it. I swear. Catherine nodded slowly. Then she turned back to Lillian, and the warmth returned. You'll stay in the blue room on the 3rd floor. Meals are at 8, 1, and 7. If you need anything, ask Mrs. Hadley. She's the housekeeper. And tomorrow, we'll begin preparations for your introduction to society. Lillian's head spun. Introduction? You're engaged to a viscount, dear. That means balls, dinners, the opera, garden parties. Every eligible family in London will want to meet you, to judge you. Catherine's smile turned wry. Welcome to the lion's den. The modiste arrived the next afternoon. Madame Duval was a sharp-eyed Frenchwoman with an acid tongue and an uncanny ability to measure someone's worth in a single glance. She circled Lillian like a hawk eyeing prey, tutting and muttering in rapid French. Too thin, she announced. And these clothes, mon Dieu. Who dressed you? A blind vicar? Lady Pembroke's cast-offs, Lillian said tightly. It shows. Madame Duval snapped her fingers at an assistant. Strip her. I need measurements. An hour later, Lillian stood in her chemise and stays, arms outstretched, while Madame Duval's assistant swarmed around her with measuring tapes and fabric samples. Every few minutes, Madame Duval would bark an order. Higher waist, darker blue. No ruffles, she's not a child. And the assistants would scatter like startled birds. Adrian's sister, Victoria, watched from the corner, eyes wide. She was 17, blonde, and pretty in the way expensive things were pretty. Polished, perfect, breakable. She'd been introduced to Lillian that morning with a curtsy and a nervous smile, and she hadn't stopped staring since. Does it hurt? Victoria asked suddenly. Lillian blinked. Does what hurt? The stays, being measured, all of it. Victoria twisted her hands together. You look uncomfortable. I'm fine. You don't look fine, Madame Duval snorted. She looks like a woman being dressed above her station, which she is. She met Lillian's eyes, not unkindly. But we will fix that. By the time I'm done, you'll look like you were born to wear silk. I don't need to look born to it, Lillian said quietly. I just need to look like I belong. Same thing, chérie. It wasn't, but Lillian didn't argue. Victoria, though, smiled. The dancing lessons were worse. Monsieur Archambault was a French ballet master with the patience of a saint and the standards of a tyrant. He arrived at Ravenscroft House every morning at 9, carrying a violin and a stick he used to tap out rhythms on the floor. Again, he said for the 15th time. Lillian gritted her teeth and tried the waltz steps again. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Turn. She stumbled. Monsieur Archambault sighed. Mademoiselle, you are thinking too much. The waltz is not mathematics. It is breath, movement, trust. I don't know how to trust this, Lillian muttered. Then learn. Adrian, who had been roped into playing the role of practice partner, caught her elbow before she could trip over her own feet. You're stiff, he said. I'm terrified. Of dancing? Of failing. His expression softened. You won't. You don't know that. I do. He adjusted his grip, pulling her slightly closer. You agreed to a fake engagement with a stranger to avoid scandal. You blackmailed Lady Pembroke into giving you a reference. You're standing in a ballroom learning to waltz with a viscount when 3 days ago you were fetching shawls. He met her eyes. You don't fail, Lillian. You survive. Something in her chest pulled tight. 1, 2, 3, Monsieur Archambault called. And again! This time Lillian didn't stumble. Bon, maman. The first public appearance was a disaster. The Harringtons' garden party was supposed to be a soft introduction. A small gathering, mostly friendly faces, a chance for Lillian to practice being engaged without the full weight of the tone's scrutiny. It lasted 20 minutes before someone asked where Lillian's family was. My parents are deceased, Lillian said, the lie smooth and practiced. Adrian had coached her for hours. I was raised by a distant aunt in the countryside. How sad, Lady Harrington said, not sounding sad at all. And your aunt, does she plan to attend the wedding? She's unwell, I'm afraid. How convenient. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. Adrian's hand found Lillian's waist, a silent warning to stay calm. Lady Harrington, I wasn't aware my fiancé's family history was a subject of public interrogation. I'm simply curious, Lord Ravencroft. After all, engagements are usually announced with some context, and yours was so sudden. Love often is. Love. Lady Harrington's smile was razor thin. How charming. They left shortly after. In the carriage, Lillian stared at her hands, fighting the urge to cry. I'm not going to survive this. You are. They hate me. They're suspicious. There's a difference. Adrian leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Lillian, look at me. She did. This was always going to be hard, he said quietly. They're going to test you, question you, try to break you. But you don't have to face them alone. He hesitated, then added, I meant what I said. You're not doing this for survival anymore. You're doing it because you're stronger than they are. Lillian wanted to believe him. She really did. But when she closed her eyes, all she saw was Lady Harrington's cold smile and the weight of 100 judging stares. And she wondered, not for the first time, if she'd made a terrible mistake. The invitations started arriving the next week. Not a few. Not a handful. Dozens. They piled up on the silver tray in the foyer, cream-colored envelopes with wax seals, elegant scripts, polite demands disguised as requests. The Pembrokes' musicale, the Duchess of Harrow's dinner, Lord Whitmore's hunting weekend. Every family with a title and an opinion wanted to meet the mysterious woman who'd somehow snared Viscount Ravencroft. We don't have to accept all of them, Adrian said, standing over the tray with his arms crossed like he was facing down an enemy battalion. Catherine picked up an envelope, turned it over, set it down. Yes, you do. Mother, if you decline too many, they'll assume you're hiding something, which you are, but they shouldn't know that. She selected 3 invitations, held them out. These. Start with these. Adrian took them reluctantly. The Ashworth's ball. Lady Pembroke's dinner. Absolutely not. Especially that one. She fired Lillian. Which is exactly why you need to attend. Show her you're not ashamed, that Lillian belongs at your side. Catherine's voice was steel. Avoidance looks like guilt, Adrian. You know this. He did. That didn't make it easier. Lillian appeared in the doorway, still wearing her dressing gown even though it was past noon. Her hair was loose, dark waves falling past her shoulders, and she looked exhausted. The dancing lessons were taking their toll. So were the etiquette sessions, the French lessons, the endless fittings. Lady Pembroke wants us at her dinner party, Adrian said flatly. Lillian went pale. No. We have to. I said no. Her voice cracked. I won't sit at her table and let them. They're going to talk either way. Adrian set the invitations down, crossed to her, stopped just close enough to lower his voice. I know it's awful. I know you don't want to face her, but if we don't go, it confirms everything they're whispering. That you're not good enough, that I'm ashamed of you, that this engagement is a sham. It is a sham. They don't know that. Lillian's hands curled into fists. For a moment, Adrian thought she might hit him. Instead, she took a sharp breath and straightened her spine. Fine. We'll go. But if she humiliates me, I'm walking out. If she humiliates you, Adrian said quietly, I'll burn her house down. Lillian's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Catherine cleared her throat. The Ashworth's ball is tomorrow night. That gives us 1 day to prepare. Prepare for what? Lillian asked warily. War. Shots. Victoria cornered Lillian in the library that afternoon. Can I ask you something? Lillian looked up from the etiquette manual she'd been pretending to read. Of course. Victoria sat down across from her, smoothing her skirts nervously. She did that a lot. Smoothed things, adjusted things, like she was trying to make herself smaller. Why did you say yes? To Adrian's proposal. Lillian hesitated. The official story was love at first sight, whirlwind romance, all the nonsense that made society matrons sigh into their tea. But Victoria was looking at her with those wide, earnest eyes, and lying felt wrong. Because I didn't have a choice, she said finally. Not a real one. Victoria frowned. What do you mean? I mean, that when your brother found me, I was being dragged down a hallway by a man who didn't care whether I wanted to go, and the people who could have stopped him didn't. Lillian set the book aside. Adrian gave me an option, a way out. It wasn't a good option, but it was better than the alternative. So you don't love him? I don't know him. But you're going to marry him? Maybe, probably not. Lillian rubbed her temples. It's complicated. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then, softly, I think you're brave. Lillian laughed bitterly. I'm not brave. I'm desperate. No. Victoria leaned forward, intensity flashing in her eyes. You stood up in front of everyone and claimed a place you weren't born into. You're learning to dance, to speak, to be someone new. That's not desperation. That's courage. Lillian wanted to argue, wanted to say that courage was a choice and she hadn't chosen any of this. But Victoria was looking at her like she was something worth admiring, and Lillian hadn't been looked at like that in years. Thank you, she said quietly. Victoria smiled. You're going to be brilliant tomorrow night. I know it. Lillian wished she believed that. The Ashworth's ball was a glittering nightmare. Chandeliers dripped crystal. Gold leaf covered the walls. Women in silk and jewels floated past like exotic birds, their laughter sharp and brittle. Lillian stood at the entrance in a midnight blue gown Madame Duval had delivered that morning, her hair pinned and curled, her hands shaking inside her gloves. Adrian's hand settled at the small of her back. Breathe. I'm breathing. You're panicking. Same thing. His mouth quirked. We'll stay an hour, dance twice, make polite conversation, then leave. That's optimistic. I'm an optimist. You're a liar. That too. They descended the stairs together. Every head turned. The music didn't stop, but it might as well have. The weight of 100 stairs pressed down like a physical thing. Lillian kept her chin up, her expression calm, even as her stomach twisted into knots. Ravencroft! Lord Ashworth materialized from the crowd, all booming voice and false cheer. And this must be the infamous Miss Hart. My dear, we've heard so much about you. All good things, I hope, Lillian said, the line practiced and smooth. Naturally. Ashworth's smile didn't reach his eyes. Tell me, how did you and Ravencroft meet? I don't believe I've seen you at any of the usual gatherings. We were introduced by mutual acquaintances, Adrian said before Lillian could answer. Quite by chance. How fortunate. Ashworth's gaze lingered on Lillian, assessing. And your family, Miss Hart, where are they from? The countryside, a small estate, you wouldn't know it. Try me. Lillian's mind went blank. They'd rehearsed this. She'd memorized names, places, entire fabricated histories. But under Ashworth's scrutiny, every detail evaporated. Derbyshire, Adrian supplied smoothly. Near Chatsworth. Beautiful area. Indeed. Ashworth didn't look convinced. Well, enjoy the evening. He walked away. Lillian exhaled slowly. That was just the beginning. Adrian steered her toward the ballroom. They're all going to do that. Probe, test, see if the story holds. What if it doesn't? It will? He squeezed her hand once, quick and reassuring. You're doing fine. She wasn't. She was drowning. but she smiled anyway and let him lead her onto the dance floor. The waltz was easier than she expected. Monsieur Archambault's lessons had drilled the steps into her muscle memory. 1, 2, 3, turn, don't think, just move. Adrian was a good lead, steady and confident, guiding her through the patterns without making it obvious he was compensating for her inexperience. "You're getting better at this," he murmured. "At lying? At dancing?" "Same thing." His lips twitched. "Touché." They completed the waltz without incident, then a quadrille. By the third dance, Lillian's feet ached and her face hurt from smiling, but no one had called her a fraud yet, and that felt like victory. Until Lady Cecilia Ashford arrived. She swept into the ballroom like she owned it, tall, blonde, devastatingly beautiful in a crimson gown that probably cost more than Lillian's entire wardrobe. Men turned to look. Women whispered, and Adrian went rigid beside Lillian. "Who is that?" Lillian asked. Adrian's jaw tightened. "No one important." "You're a terrible liar." "Cecilia Ashford, Lord Ashford's cousin." His voice was flat, emotionless. "We were acquainted, years ago." "Acquainted?" Briefly. Lady Cecilia spotted them. Her red lips curved into a smile that made Lillian's skin crawl. She glided across the ballroom, hips swaying, eyes locked on Adrian. "Adrian," she purred, "how wonderful to see you." "Cecilia. And you must be the famous Miss Hart." Cecilia's gaze raked over Lillian, sharp and assessing. "How unexpected. I wouldn't have thought you were Adrian's type." Lillian forced a smile. "People change. Do they?" Cecilia tilted her head, still looking at Adrian. "I remember when you preferred women with a bit more refinement." The insult landed like a slap. Adrian's hand tightened on Lillian's waist. "Cecilia, oh, don't be tiresome, darling. I'm simply making conversation." She leaned closer, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Though I must say, I'm surprised you're going through with this. Marriage is so permanent, and you were never one for commitment." Lillian felt Adrian stiffen, saw something flicker in his eyes, pain maybe, or old anger. And she realized with cold clarity that Cecilia wasn't just an ex-lover. She was the wound that hadn't healed. "If you'll excuse us," Adrian said tightly, "we were just leaving." "So soon? The night's barely started." Cecilia's smile widened. "But of course. I'm sure Miss Hart needs her rest. All this social climbing must be exhausting." Lillian's vision went red. Later, she wouldn't be able to explain what possessed her. Maybe it was weeks of biting her tongue, of letting people insult her, of pretending she was less than she was. Maybe it was the look on Adrian's face, shuttered and small, like he was 16 again, and being told he wasn't enough. Or maybe she was just tired of being afraid. "You're right," she said pleasantly. "It is exhausting, almost as exhausting as watching a woman throw herself at a man who clearly doesn't want her." Cecilia's smile froze. "Lillian," Adrian started. "Tell me, Lady Cecilia," Lillian continued, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "How long did it take you to pick that dress? Because from the way you're displaying yourself, I assume you were hoping to catch someone's attention. Such a shame when effort goes unrewarded." The ballroom went silent. Cecilia's face flushed crimson. "How dare you?" "I dare because I'm standing here as Adrian's fiancée, and you're not." Lillian stepped forward, every inch of borrowed confidence she'd learned over the past week sharpening into something real. "Whatever you were to him is over, and the fact that you're still trying to undermine him, to hurt him, says far more about you than it does about me." "You have no idea what you're talking about," Cecilia hissed. "Don't I?" Lillian met her eyes. "I know you're the kind of woman who tears people down to make herself feel powerful. I know you're here because you heard Adrian was engaged and you couldn't stand the thought of him moving on. And I know that if you say one more word about his commitment or my refinement or any other thinly veiled insult, I will ensure that every person in this ballroom knows exactly what kind of woman you are." Cecilia's mouth opened, closed. She looked at Adrian, clearly expecting him to intervene, to apologize, to smooth things over the way he probably always had. He didn't. "We're leaving," he said quietly. Then, louder, "Good evening, Lady Cecilia." He took Lillian's hand and led her out of the ballroom. Behind them, the whispers exploded like fireworks. Oh, they didn't speak in the carriage. Adrian stared out the window, jaw tight, hands clenched on his knees. Lillian sat across from him, adrenaline still buzzing through her veins, waiting for the inevitable reprimand. It came when they reached Ravencroft House. Adrian got out first, helped her down, and walked straight into the study without a word. Lillian followed, her stomach sinking. He poured himself a drink, downed it, poured another. "I'm sorry," Lillian said. "For what?" "For what I said. To Lady Cecilia, I shouldn't have—" "You defended me." Adrian's voice was rough. "In front of half of London's elite, you stood up to a woman who's been tormenting me for years, and you didn't flinch." Lillian blinked. "You're not angry?" He broke off laughing bitterly. "I don't know what I am. Impressed, terrified, grateful." He set the glass down. "Cecilia and I were engaged once, 3 years ago. I thought I loved her. Turns out she just wanted the title and the money, and when she found out we had more debts than assets, she ended it, publicly, humiliated me at my own sister's debut." Lillian's chest tightened. "Adrian, I've spent 3 years avoiding her, letting her snipe at me, accepting it because I thought I deserved it." He looked at Lillian, something raw and unguarded in his eyes. "And then you walked up to her and called her out without hesitation. Why?" "Because she was hurting you. You barely know me." "I know enough." Lillian crossed the room, stopped in front of him. "I know you followed me into a hallway when no one else did. I know you've been patient and kind, even when I've been terrified and useless. I know you haven't asked for anything in return." She hesitated. "And I know what it's like to be treated like you're not worth defending." Adrian stared at her. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then he said very quietly, "This arrangement was supposed to be temporary." "I know. A few months. Just long enough to stop the gossip. I know. But I don't—" He stopped, started again. "I don't want it to be temporary anymore." Lillian's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that somewhere between the dancing lessons and the garden parties, and you threatening to stab Lady Cecilia with words, I started caring about you. Not as a convenient excuse, not as a shield against scandal. As you." He reached out, fingertips brushing her cheek. "And that terrifies me." Lillian's heart was a wild thing in her chest. "Why?" "Because what if you don't feel the same? What if this is still just survival for you?" She should have lied. Should have kept the walls up, protected herself, remembered that this was always meant to end. Instead, she kissed him. It wasn't graceful. Her angle was wrong, and she bumped his nose, and for a second she thought she'd misread everything. But then his hands came up to cup her face, and he kissed her back like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian pressed his forehead to hers. "That's a yes then," he said shakily. "That's a yes. We're still going to have to pretend. In public. Until the scandal dies." "I know. And people are going to keep testing you, attacking you, trying to break us apart." "Let them try." Adrian laughed, the sound ragged with relief. "You're terrifying." "Good." He kissed her again, slower this time, and Lillian felt the last of her carefully constructed defenses crumble. This was supposed to be fake, safe, temporary. It wasn't anymore. And she had no idea what came next. The gossip hit the next morning. Not whispers, not speculation. Full-blown scandal, printed in black and white in the society pages. Viscountess-to-be creates scene at Ashworth Ball. Miss Lillian Hart. Publicly insults Lady Cecilia Ashford. Engagement in question. Catherine read the article aloud over breakfast, her voice carefully neutral. Sources report that Miss Hart, engaged to Viscount Ravencroft, confronted Lady Cecilia Ashford with shocking rudeness, accusing her of improper advances toward the Viscount. Lady Ashford is said to be deeply distressed. Questions arise regarding Miss Hart's suitability for high society. She set the paper down. "Well," Adrian's knuckles were white around his teacup. "I'll contact the editor, demand a retraction." "That will only make it worse." "Then what do you suggest?" "We host a dinner party," Catherine said. "Here, invite Lady Cecilia and anyone else who's been spreading rumors. Face them directly." Lillian's stomach turned over. "That's a terrible idea. It's the only idea. Catherine met her eyes. You can't hide from this, dear. If you do, they'll assume you're ashamed, that you should be ashamed. You have to show them you're not afraid. But I am afraid. Then pretend you're not. Catherine's smile was thin but kind. You've been pretending since the day you arrived. What's one more performance? Peut-être. The dinner party was set for Friday. 3 days to prepare. 3 days to send invitations, plan the menu, rehearse responses to every possible insult. 3 days for Lillian's anxiety to build until she could barely sleep. Victoria found her in the garden the night before, sitting on a stone bench and staring at nothing. You're going to be brilliant, Victoria said, sitting beside her. You keep saying that. Because it's true. What if I'm not? What if I freeze? What if I say the wrong thing and destroy everything Adrian's worked for? Then you'll recover. Victoria tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Lillian, can I tell you something? Of course. After what happened to me, at that house party, I stopped talking for 3 months. Victoria's voice was very small. I was so ashamed. I thought it was my fault, that I'd done something wrong, and everyone around me just let me believe that. They whispered. They pitied me. But no one told me I was allowed to be angry. Lillian's throat ached. Victoria, you're allowed to be angry, Victoria said fiercely. At Lady Cecilia, at Lady Pembroke, at every person who's ever made you feel small. And you're allowed to fight back. She squeezed Lillian's hand. You already have. You just need to do it one more time. Lillian looked at this girl, this brave, broken, healing girl, and felt something shift in her chest. Okay, she said. One more time. Lady Cecilia arrived exactly on time, dressed in pale pink and dripping false sweetness. Miss Hart, she said, offering her hand. How kind of you to invite me. Lillian shook it, smiling. How kind of you to come. The dinner was a small, intimate affair. 12 guests, including Cecilia, Lord Ashworth, the Harringtons, and a few other carefully selected members of society. The kind of people whose opinions mattered, whose approval could make or break a reputation. They settled into the dining room, candlelight gleaming off silverware. Catherine sat at one end of the table, Adrian at the other. Lillian sat beside him, spine straight, hands steady. The first course arrived. Polite conversation flowed, weather, the opera, the latest parliamentary debate. Nothing controversial, nothing real. Then Lord Ashworth leaned forward. Miss Hart, I've been meaning to ask, where exactly is your family's estate in Derbyshire? I have cousins near Chatsworth. Perhaps we're acquainted. Here it was, the trap they'd been waiting for. Lillian set down her fork. Actually, Lord Ashworth, I need to correct something. The table went silent. My family isn't from Derbyshire. They're not from anywhere. She met his eyes. I don't have a family. I was raised in a charity school in Kent. I became a companion because I had no other options. When Lord Ravenscroft proposed, I was nobody. Gasps rippled around the table. Lillian, Adrian started. No. She kept her gaze steady. I'm tired of lying. You all know the truth anyway. You've been whispering about it since the engagement was announced. So here it is. I'm not from your world. I wasn't born into wealth or title. I don't have connections or bloodlines. She paused. But I'm here, and I'm not leaving. Lady Cecilia's smile was venomous. How refreshingly honest. Tell me, Miss Hart, does Lord Ravenscroft know you're using him to climb out of the gutter? He knows I'm grateful. He also knows I love him. The words came out clear, certain, which is more than you ever did. Cecilia's face went white. You left him, Lillian continued. When you found out his fortune wasn't as large as you hoped, you humiliated him, tormented him, and now you're sitting at his table pretending to be a victim because I refused to let you hurt him again. She leaned forward. So yes, I'm from the gutter, but at least I know how to be loyal. The silence was deafening. Then Catherine picked up her wine glass. Well said, my dear. She took a sip. Adrian followed suit. Then Victoria. Then, slowly, Lord Harrington. Lady Cecilia stood abruptly. I won't sit here and be insulted. Then leave, Adrian said quietly. She stared at him. Leave, he repeated. You're no longer welcome in my home." Cecilia's mouth trembled. For a moment, Lillian almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then Cecilia turned and swept out, head high, fury radiating from every step. Lord Ashworth cleared his throat. "Well, that was unexpected." "Life often is," Catherine said lightly. "Shall we proceed to the second course?" The guests left 2 hours later, murmuring polite goodbyes and speculative glances. Lillian stood in the foyer, exhausted and exhilarated and terrified of what would happen next. Adrian's hand found hers. "That," he said, "was either brilliant or catastrophic. Probably both. Are you all right?" I told the truth, in front of everyone. She laughed shakily. "I think I'm going to be sick." "You were extraordinary. I was reckless." "Same thing." She leaned into him, feeling his warmth, his solidity. "What happens now?" "Now," Adrian said, "we wait and see if London forgives us." They didn't have to wait long. The next morning, 3 new invitations arrived. Not from enemies, from allies. From families who'd heard what happened and decided that maybe, just maybe, Lillian Hart was exactly the kind of woman Viscount Ravencroft needed. It wasn't acceptance. Not yet. But it was a start. And for the first time since this all began, Lillian allowed herself to hope. Hope lasted exactly 4 days. On the 5th morning, Adrian's solicitor arrived unannounced, his face grim, and a leather portfolio clutched in his hands like a weapon. Catherine met him in the drawing room, and whatever he said made her go pale enough that Victoria ran to fetch Adrian from his study. Lillian watched from the doorway as the solicitor spread papers across the mahogany table. Documents, letters, something that looked like a bank ledger. Adrian's expression went from concerned to furious in the span of a heartbeat. "When did this happen?" His voice was ice. 3 days ago, my lord. The creditors filed simultaneously. I only received notice this morning." "How much?" The solicitor hesitated. £43,000. Catherine made a sound like she'd been struck. Lillian's stomach dropped. She didn't know much about money, had never had enough of it to matter, but she knew that number was devastating. Knew it from the way Adrian's hands curled into fists, the way Victoria's face crumpled, the way Catherine pressed a handkerchief to her mouth like she might be sick. 43,000, Adrian repeated flatly. "For debts my father incurred before his death." "Yes, my lord. The creditors claim they've been patient long enough. They're demanding immediate payment or they'll seize the estate." "We don't have £43,000. I'm aware. So what are my options?" The solicitor's expression was answer enough. Lillian stepped into the room. "What does this mean?" Adrian looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw defeat in his eyes. "It means we're ruined." The full picture emerged slowly, painfully, over the next hour. Adrian's father had been a gambler. Not the casual social kind, the desperate kind. The kind who bet on horses, cards, dice, anything that promised quick money and delivered only debt. He'd hidden it well, forged documents, bribed clerks, kept the creditors at bay with promises and partial payments. When he died 2 years ago, Adrian inherited not just the title, but a financial catastrophe. "I've been managing it," Adrian said, pacing the study while Lillian sat in the chair he'd abandoned. "Selling off properties, liquidating investments. I've paid back nearly half of what he owed, but these creditors—" He slammed his hand against the desk. "They waited. Let me think I was making progress, then coordinated an attack when they knew I was vulnerable." "Why now?" Lillian asked. "Because of you." She flinched. "Not like that." Adrian's voice softened. "They saw the engagement announcement, saw me courting someone with no fortune, no connections. They assumed I was desperate enough to marry for love instead of money, which means I have no plan to solve the debt." He laughed bitterly. "They're right. There has to be something." "There isn't." He turned to face her, and she saw the weight he'd been carrying for 2 years etched into every line of his face. "Unless I marry an heiress with enough money to cover the debts, we'll lose everything. The house, the estate, Victoria's dowry. My mother will have nothing. So marry an heiress." "I can't. I'm engaged to you." The words hung between them like an axe. Lillian stood slowly, her legs unsteady. "You could break the engagement." "Lillian, we always said it was temporary." A few months, then we'd end it quietly. This just moves up the timeline. I'm not breaking our engagement so I can auction myself off to the highest bidder. Why not? Her voice cracked. I'm nobody, Adrian. I have nothing to offer you. If marrying someone else saves your family, I don't want someone else. You need someone else. I need you. She shook her head, fighting tears. That's not enough. Love doesn't pay debts. It doesn't save estates. Your father proved that. The comparison was cruel, and she saw it land. Adrian went rigid, pain flashing across his face. Don't, he said quietly. Don't what? Tell the truth? Lillian stepped closer, desperate to make him understand. I grew up with nothing. I know what it means to lose everything, and I know that if you choose me over your family's survival, you'll regret it. Maybe not today. Maybe not next year, but eventually. She reached for his hand. Let me go. Adrian pulled away. No. Adrian, I said no. His voice was raw. I'll find another way. There is no other way. Then I'll make one. He walked out, leaving Lillian alone with the wreckage. Yes, Victoria found her an hour later, still sitting in the study, staring at nothing. He's not going to change his mind, Victoria said softly, sitting beside her. He should. Maybe, but he won't. She twisted her hands together. He's been trying to fix our father's mistakes for 2 years, sacrificing everything, and then you came along, and for the first time I saw him actually want something. Not duty, not obligation, just happiness. His happiness doesn't matter if you all end up on the street. Doesn't it? Victoria's eyes were sad. What's the point of saving the family if we destroy him in the process? Lillian didn't have an answer. That night, she lay awake in the blue room, listening to the house settle around her. Downstairs, she could hear Adrian moving, pacing probably the way he did when he was trying to solve impossible problems. She wanted to go to him, wanted to tell him it would be all right, but she'd never been a good liar. The solution arrived 3 days later in the form of Lady Beatrice Whitmore. She was everything Lillian wasn't, wealthy, titled, beautiful in that effortless way rich girls were beautiful. Her father owned half of Yorkshire and most of the coal mines in Wales. She'd been introduced to Adrian at a garden party 2 weeks ago, and according to the gossip Victoria had overheard, she'd made her interest abundantly clear. She's perfect, Catherine said quietly, watching Lady Beatrice glide through the Harrisons' ballroom like she owned it. Young, wealthy, well-connected, and she wants him. Lillian's chest felt like it was caving in. Then he should pursue her. He won't. Not while he's engaged to you. I could break it off. Catherine turned to look at her, eyes sharp. Is that what you want? It's what he needs. That's not what I asked. Lillian swallowed hard. No, it's not what I want, but what I want doesn't matter. It matters to him. It shouldn't, Catherine sighed. You know, when Adrian told me about you, about what happened that night with Lord Ashford, I thought he was being reckless, throwing away his future for a stranger. But then I met you and I understood. Understood what? Why he couldn't walk away. Catherine's smile was sad. You remind me of myself, before I married his father, when I still believed love was enough to survive on. Is it? No. The word was gentle but final. Love is wonderful, essential even, but it doesn't pay creditors or keep roofs over heads. I learned that the hard way. Lillian's throat ached. So what do I do? You decide what you can live with, and then you act. Lady Beatrice cornered Adrian during the third dance. Lillian watched from across the room, every muscle in her body tense as the blonde woman touched Adrian's arm, smiled up at him, said something that made him stiffen. He glanced toward Lillian, conflicted, and Lady Beatrice followed his gaze. Their eyes met across the ballroom. Lady Beatrice's smile sharpened. She said something else to Adrian, something that made his jaw clench, and then she was walking away, hips swaying, victory in every step. Adrian crossed to Lillian. We're leaving. What did she say? Nothing important. Adrian? She made me an offer. His voice was tight. A generous one. £45,000 to clear the debts, plus an additional $10,000 for Victoria's dowry. All I have to do is end our engagement and marry her instead. Lillian's heart stopped. That's more than enough. I know. You should accept. I told her no. Why? Because I'm not for sale. The words came out louder than he'd intended. Several heads turned. Adrian lowered his voice, pulling Lillian toward a quieter corner. I'm not going to trade my entire future for money. I've watched my father do that my whole life. Chase fortune, gamble on quick wins, sacrifice everything that mattered for the chance at more. I won't become him. You're not him. Then why does this feel the same? His eyes were anguished, choosing between love and survival, between what I want and what's right. Because sometimes they're not the same thing. Lillian reached up, touched his face, memorizing the feel of him. And sometimes the right choice is the one that breaks your heart. Don't. Adrian's hand covered hers. Don't say goodbye. I'm not. She smiled even as tears burned her eyes. I'm saying I trust you. Whatever you decide, I'll understand. Lillian, my lord. A servant appeared, bowing. A message for you, marked urgent. Adrian took the sealed letter, frowning, broke the wax, read. His face went white. What is it? Lillian asked. He didn't answer, just handed her the letter. The handwriting was elegant, feminine. The message was 3 lines long. I know about the fake engagement. I have proof. Meet me at the Ashford estate tomorrow at noon, alone, or I'll expose you both. It was signed with a single initial, C. Cecilia. Unchian. They rode back to Ravencroft House in silence, the letter burning in Adrian's pocket like a live coal. How does she know? Lillian asked finally. I don't know. Maybe someone talked. Maybe she just guessed. Adrian rubbed his face. It doesn't matter. If she goes public with this, we're both ruined. And my family along with us. Lillian's mind raced. What does she want? Revenge, humiliation, maybe money. He laughed bitterly. Or maybe she just wants to watch me fall. You can't go alone. I have to. Then I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. Adrian turned to her, eyes fierce. If this goes wrong, if she tries something, I need you safe, far from this. I'm already in this. We both are. Lillian grabbed his hand. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. He looked at her for a long moment, then quietly. You're the bravest person I've ever met. I'm terrified. I know. That's what makes you brave. They held each other in the dark carriage, the city rolling past in shadows and gaslight, both of them knowing that tomorrow might destroy everything they'd built. The Ashford estate was a sprawling Gothic monstrosity an hour outside London, all dark stone and ivy-covered walls. Adrian and Lillian arrived at noon exactly, the gates already open, a silent servant directing them to the east wing. Cecilia waited in what had once been a conservatory, glass walls, dead plants, furniture covered in dust sheets. She sat in the only clear chair dressed in black like she was already mourning their downfall. You brought her, Cecilia said, not looking at Lillian. How touching. What do you want? Adrian's voice was flat. Closure. Cecilia stood, pulling something from her pocket, a stack of papers, folded and worn. Do you remember these? Adrian went still. Letters, Cecilia continued, that you wrote me during our engagement. Before you knew I was only interested in your money, before I broke your heart. She smiled. Very passionate letters. Very revealing. Those are private. They were. Until I showed them to a friend, who happened to mention that your writing style in these letters is very different from your writing style now. More emotional, less guarded. She unfolded one, read aloud. I would give up everything for you. Title, fortune, family. None of it matters if I can't have your love. Adrian's face was stone. And then, Cecilia said, I remembered that at the Ashworth ball you didn't defend Miss Hart. You let her fight her own battle. Very unlike the passionate man who wrote these letters. Almost as if, she looked at Lillian, you don't actually love her. You're wrong. Am I? Cecilia pulled out another document. This one looked official, heavy paper, multiple signatures. This is a witness statement from Lady Pembroke's former parlor maid. She swears that on the night of the engagement, she overheard you and Miss Hart in the library, planning to fake a relationship to avoid scandal. Lillian's blood turned to ice. I paid her handsomely for it, Cecilia continued, and I have 3 other servants willing to testify to similar conversations. Enough evidence to prove fraud. Enough to destroy you both. Adrian's hands curled into fists. What do you want? I want you to marry Lady Beatrice. Silence. She's already made you an offer, Cecilia said. Accept it. End this farce with Miss Hart. Marry money like you should have done from the start, and I'll destroy these documents. And if I refuse, then I go to the papers, the courts. I ruin you so thoroughly that no family will ever associate with you again. Your mother will die in poverty. Your sister will never marry. And Miss Hart, she smiled at Lillian. Well, I'm sure there are many establishments that would be happy to employ a disgraced woman with no references. The threat hung in the air like poison. Adrian looked at Lillian. She saw the calculation in his eyes, the desperate math he was doing. His family's survival versus their happiness. Duty versus love. Everything he'd been taught versus everything he wanted. Don't, Lillian whispered. I have to. No, you don't. She turned to Cecilia, heart pounding. You want to expose us? Fine. Do it. Cecilia blinked. Excuse me? Expose us. Tell everyone the engagement was fake. Show them your evidence, your witness statements, all of it. Lillian stepped forward, channeling every ounce of courage she had left. Because here's what will happen. Yes, we'll be scandalized. Yes, people will judge us. But they'll also see that you, a wealthy, titled woman, went to extraordinary lengths to destroy 2 people whose only crime was trying to survive. That's not... You hired servants to spy on us. You collected private letters. You've been stalking Adrian for 3 years because you can't stand that he moved on. Lillian's voice was steel. And when all of that comes out, and it will, who do you think society will sympathize with? The vindictive ex-lover or the man who tried to protect someone weaker than himself? Cecilia's smile faltered. You're betting that we're too afraid of scandal to fight back, Lillian continued. But you're wrong. We've been fighting since the day this started, and we're not stopping now. You're bluffing. Try me. For a long moment, Cecilia stared at her. Then slowly she looked at Adrian. You'd really let her throw away your family's future for pride? It's not pride. Adrian moved to stand beside Lillian, his hand finding hers. It's principle. And yes, I would. Something crumbled in Cecilia's expression. Fury, or maybe grief, or maybe just the realization that she'd lost. You'll regret this, she said quietly. Maybe. Adrian's voice was steady. But at least I'll regret it on my terms. They turned to leave. Cecilia's voice stopped them at the door. She's using you, you know, Miss Hart. She's playing a role. You think she loves you, but she just loves what you can give her. Security, status, a way out of the gutter. Adrian didn't turn around. If that were true, she would have let me marry Lady Beatrice. They walked out into the gray afternoon, leaving Cecilia alone with her poison and her papers and her hollow victory. The story hit the papers the next morning. Not the scandal Cecilia had threatened, the whole truth. Someone, possibly Cecilia herself in a fit of spite, had leaked everything. The fake engagement, the bargain, the dinner party confrontation, all of it laid bare in black and white for London to dissect. Viscount Ravencroft's engagement revealed as elaborate ruse. Miss Hart and Lord Ravencroft admit to deception. Society questions their true motives. Catherine read it over breakfast, her face unreadable. Victoria looked like she might cry. Adrian sat in silence, jaw tight, waiting for the world to end. It didn't. Instead, something unexpected happened. Letters arrived. Not threats or condemnation, support. From families who'd faced similar scandals. From women who'd been cornered by men like Ashford and had no one to defend them. From people who saw the story not as fraud, but as survival. They're on your side, Catherine said, staring at the pile of correspondence in disbelief. Some of them, anyway. Adrian picked up a letter, scanned it. Lady Morrison says what we did was resourceful. Lord Blackwood calls it admirable pragmatism. He looked at Lillian. They don't care that we lied. They care that we tried to protect each other. Lillian's throat was tight. What about the ones who don't support us? There are plenty of those too. Victoria held up a vicious editorial. This one calls you a scheming opportunist. That one says Adrian should be stripped of his title. So we're divided, Lillian said. No, Catherine said slowly. You're controversial, which is better than being forgotten. The turning point came 3 days later at the Duchess of Harrow's annual gala. They almost didn't go. The invitation had been delivered before the scandal broke, and no one was sure if it still stood. But Adrian had decided they couldn't hide, that if they were going to survive this, they had to face London head-on. So they dressed in their finest and walked into the ballroom like they weren't social pariahs. The room went silent. Every eye turned. Every conversation stopped. Lillian felt the weight of their judgment pressing down like a physical force, crushing her lungs, making it hard to breathe. Adrian's hand tightened on hers. We can leave. No. She forced her chin up. We stay. They moved into the crowd. People stepped back. Some turned away entirely. Others whispered behind fans and gloves, their words sharp enough to cut even from a distance. Then the Duchess of Harrow herself appeared. She was ancient, powerful, utterly untouchable, the kind of woman who could make or break a reputation with a single sentence. She looked Lillian up and down, expression inscrutable. So, she said finally, you're the girl who's been causing all this fuss. Yes, Your Grace. And you admit the engagement was a lie. Yes. To avoid scandal. To survive it. The Duchess's eyes narrowed. Interesting distinction. She turned to Adrian. And you, boy? Do you love her? Adrian didn't hesitate. Yes. Even knowing she came from nothing? Even knowing it will cost you everything? Especially knowing that. The Duchess studied them both, then, shockingly, she smiled. Good. I was worried you'd inherited your father's cowardice. She raised her voice, addressing the room. This engagement may have started as a fiction, but it's clear to me that what these two young people have found is real, and anyone who can't see that is a fool. She turned and walked away. The room erupted in whispers, but this time they sounded different, uncertain, thoughtful. Adrian exhaled shakily. Did that just happen? I think so. Did the most powerful woman in London just endorse us? I think so. They looked at each other and started to laugh, giddy, disbelieving, relief flooding through them like a drug. But the laughter died when Lillian saw who was standing by the refreshment table. Lady Beatrice Whitmore, watching them with cold calculation, and beside her leaning close and whispering in her ear, Lord Ashford. Lillian's blood went cold. Ashford was supposed to be in disgrace after what had happened at the ball. But here he was, smiling like a predator, his eyes locked on Lillian with an expression that promised retribution. Adrian followed her gaze, went rigid. We need to go, he said quietly. Why? What? Now, Lillian. But it was too late. Ashford was already crossing the room, Lady Beatrice beside him, both of them wearing identical smiles. Lord Ravenscroft, Ashford said pleasantly. Miss Hart, what a surprise to see you here. Ashford, Adrian's voice was ice. I thought you'd left London. I did, but business called me back. His gaze slid to Lillian. Unfinished business. We have nothing to discuss, don't we? Ashford pulled a document from his coat. This is a contract between myself and the late Viscount Ravenscroft, your father. He borrowed £15,000 from me 7 years ago. I'm calling in the debt. Adrian's face went white. That debt was settled. The debt was deferred. There's a difference. Ashford smiled. I'm sure your solicitor can explain the legal particulars, but the short version is you owe me £15,000 immediately, or I take possession of Ravenscroft House. You can't. I can. I have the law on my side. He leaned closer. And unlike your other creditors, I'm not interested in payment plans or negotiations. I want what's owed, tonight. Adrian's hands shook. I don't have £15,000. I know. Ashford's smile widened. But Lady Beatrice does. Beatrice stepped forward, her expression sympathetic in a way that made Lillian's skin crawl. I'm willing to pay Lord Ashford on your behalf, Lord Ravenscroft. Clear the debt entirely. All you have to do is marry you instead of her. Lillian finished flatly. Exactly. Beatrice's smile was poisonous. Seems like a fair trade, doesn't it? Your family's security for a simple change of bride. Adrian looked between them, fury and desperation warring on his face. This is a setup. This is business, Ashford shrugged. You have until midnight to decide. After that, I file the seizure paperwork. He walked away, Beatrice following, leaving Adrian and Lillian standing in the middle of the ballroom with the eyes of London's elite burning into their backs. Adrian's voice was barely audible. I can't lose the house. My mother, Victoria, they have nowhere else to go. Lillian's heart shattered. I know, but I can't lose you either. You won't. She reached up, cupped his face, forced him to look at her. Whatever you decide, I'll still be here. Not as your fiancée, not as your wife, but as someone who loves you enough to let you save your family. That's not fair. Life isn't fair. Her voice broke. But you taught me that love is. And this is what love looks like, sacrificing what you want for what matters most. Adrian pulled her close, holding her like he could keep the world from tearing them apart through sheer force of will. Across the ballroom, Ashford checked his pocket watch. 11 hours until midnight. 11 hours until Adrian had to choose between Lillian and everything he'd been fighting to protect. And Lillian knew, with absolute crushing certainty, that she'd already lost him. The carriage ride back to Ravencroft House felt like a funeral procession. Adrian stared out the window, jaw working, hands clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white. Lillian sat across from him, watching the gaslit streets blur past, trying to memorize the feeling of being close to him because she knew this was ending. There has to be another way, Adrian said for the third time. So Lillian didn't answer. They'd been circling this conversation for the past 20 minutes, and every path led to the same conclusion. I could contest the contract, claim fraud. That takes months. You have 11 hours. I could borrow from someone else. Who? Everyone knows you're drowning in debt. No one will lend you money. Then I'll sell something. The paintings, the silver, something. Adrian. Lillian's voice was gentle. You've already sold everything worth selling. There's nothing left. He turned to her, eyes wild with desperation. Then what do I do? You marry Lady Beatrice. No. You save your family. Not without you. You have to. She leaned forward, taking his hands even though touching him hurt. Your mother needs a home. Victoria needs a future. You can't throw that away for me. I'm not throwing it away. I'm choosing you. And I'm choosing them. Lillian's throat was so tight she could barely speak. Someone has to be practical here. Someone has to make the hard choice. Let it be me. Adrian pulled his hands free, pressing them to his face. This is insane. Ashford planned this. He's been waiting for the right moment to destroy me, and now he's won. No. Adrian dropped his hands, fire returning to his eyes. No, he hasn't. There's still time. We can... The carriage jolted to a stop. Not at Ravencroft House. They were blocks away, in front of a narrow townhouse Lillian didn't recognize. Where are we? She asked. Adrian was already opening the door. Somewhere I should have gone days ago. He helped her down, then strode up to the townhouse door and knocked hard enough to rattle the frame. A servant answered, took one look at Adrian's face, and disappeared inside without a word. 2 minutes later, Adrian's solicitor appeared, coat hastily thrown over his nightshirt, hair disheveled. My lord, it's nearly midnight. I need every document related to my father's debts. All of them. Now. The solicitor blinked. My lord, we've been through those papers a dozen times. There's nothing... Then we'll go through them a 13th time. Adrian pushed past him into the house. Because I'm not accepting that Ashford holds a legitimate contract. My father was a cheat and a liar. If he signed that debt, he did it drunk or desperate or both. There has to be something wrong with it. Lillian followed them into a cramped study that smelled like old paper and pipe smoke. The solicitor lit lamps while Adrian started pulling ledgers from shelves, spreading them across the desk with shaking hands. What am I looking for? Lillian asked quietly. Anything. Inconsistencies, forged signatures, evidence that the debt was paid or forgiven or transferred. Adrian flipped open a ledger, scanned the entries. Ashford claims my father borrowed £15,000 7 years ago, so we look for records from that year and see if they match his contract. They worked in tense silence for the next hour. The solicitor brought coffee that went cold. Adrian's mother arrived sometime after 1, woken by a servant's message, and joined the search without questions. Victoria came too, pale and frightened but determined. Lillian found herself cross-referencing dates between 3 different ledgers, her eyes burning with exhaustion, searching for a miracle she didn't believe in. Until she found it. Adrian. He looked up from the document he'd been studying. This entry. She pointed to a line dated June 1811. £15,000 paid to a creditor named J. Ashford. Same amount as the debt. Adrian was at her side in an instant. June 1811. That's 7 years ago. He grabbed the contract Ashford had shown them earlier, which Adrian had, apparently, pocketed at the gala. Scanned the dates. Ashford's contract says the debt was incurred in April 1811. The solicitor leaned over their shoulders. So your father borrowed in April and repaid in June? Or the contract is fraudulent? Adrian's hands trembled as he set the papers side by side. Look at the signatures. The contract signature is shaky, uneven, but the ledger signature is clear and steady, like 2 different people signed them. Or the same person at 2 different times, Catherine said quietly. Your father's signature changed dramatically after his first stroke. Before April 1811, he wrote like a scholar. After, his hand shook so badly he could barely hold a pen. Adrian went very still. The contract signature looks like post-stroke handwriting, but if the debt was incurred in April, before the stroke, then the signature is forged. Silence crashed through the room. That's not enough, the solicitor said finally. You'd need evidence that Ashford deliberately falsified the document. A handwriting expert, testimony, something that proves intent. What about the payment record? Lillian asked. If Adrian's father paid the debt in June, Ashford can't claim it's still owed. Unless he claims the payment was for a different debt. To a creditor named J. Ashford. How many Ashfords was the late Viscount borrowing from? The solicitor hesitated. It's unusual, but not impossible. Adrian slammed his hand on the desk. It's a lie. Ashford forged that contract, or had someone else sign it, and he's using it to blackmail me because he knows I'm desperate. He turned to the solicitor. Can we prove it? Maybe, with time. But you don't have time. Then we make him give us time. How? Adrian's smile was sharp and cold. We call his bluff. They returned to the gala at 3 in the morning. The party was winding down, guests departing, servants clearing glasses. The Duchess of Harrow looking irritated that anyone was still present. But Ashford was there, lounging near the balcony with Lady Beatrice, both of them wearing expressions of smug anticipation. Adrian walked straight up to him. I need more time, he said. Ashford checked his pocket watch. You have 9 hours. Not enough. I want a week. Absolutely not. Then 3 days. No. Ashford's smile was sharp. The terms were clear, Ravencroft. Midnight tonight or I seize the property. Unless, of course, you've reconsidered Lady Beatrice's generous offer. I've reconsidered something else. Adrian pulled the ledger entry from his coat, held it up. This. A payment of £15,000 to J. Ashford in June 1811, 2 months after you claim my father borrowed the money. Ashford's expression flickered. That was a different debt, was it? Because it's a remarkable coincidence. Same amount, same creditor, same year. Coincidences happen. So do forgeries. Adrian stepped closer. I think you fabricated that contract. I think you forged my father's signature, or bribed someone else to sign it, and you've been waiting for the perfect moment to use it against me. That's slander. It's the truth, and I'm going to prove it. With what? A single ledger entry? Ashford laughed. You have nothing. I have enough to make you look suspicious. And once I start asking questions, once I hire handwriting experts and bring this to court, people will wonder why you're so desperate to collect a debt that should have been paid years ago. Adrian's voice dropped. They'll wonder what else you've forged, what other debts you've fabricated, how many other families you've blackmailed. Ashford's jaw tightened. So here's my offer, Adrian continued. Give me 3 days to investigate this contract. If I can't prove fraud, I'll marry Lady Beatrice and you'll get your money. But if I can prove it, if I can show that you've been lying, I'll destroy you, publicly, completely. You're bluffing, am I? Adrian smiled, cold and humorless. You're betting I won't risk my family's future on a hunch, but you're wrong. Because the one thing I learned from my father is that desperate men take desperate gambles, and I'm done playing by your rules. The silence stretched, taut and dangerous. Finally, Ashford said, 2 days, not 3. Done. But if you fail, if you can't prove fraud, you don't just marry Lady Beatrice. You publicly apologize for the accusation. You admit you fabricated evidence to avoid your obligations. And you give me the house and an additional £5,000 for the insult. Adrian's hands curled into fists, but he nodded. Agreed. They shook on it, and Lillian saw the calculation in Ashford's eyes. The certainty that Adrian would fail, that desperation had made him reckless, that in 2 days this would all be over. But as they walked away, Adrian's hand found Lillian's, and he squeezed once. A silent message. Trust me. She did, even when it terrified her. The next 48 hours were a blur of frantic activity. Adrian hired 3 different handwriting experts, tracked down servants who'd worked for his father during the stroke recovery, contacted every creditor his father had ever dealt with, looking for patterns, inconsistencies, anything that proved Ashford had a history of fraud. Lillian worked beside him, sorting documents, taking notes, running messages across London when speed mattered more than propriety. Victoria helped too, her sharp eyes catching details Adrian missed. Even Catherine joined in, using her society connections to quietly spread rumors about Ashford's business practices, planting seeds of doubt. The first handwriting expert confirmed what they suspected. The contract signature didn't match the Viscount's pre-stroke writing, but he couldn't definitively prove forgery without more samples. The second expert was more cautious, unwilling to stake his reputation on incomplete evidence. The third expert was an elderly man named Whitmore, who testified in fraud cases for 30 years. He studied the contract for 2 hours, comparing it to authenticated samples of the late Viscount's writing, and finally looked up with grim satisfaction. It's a forgery, he said. See here, the pressure points are wrong. Your father wrote with a heavy hand before his stroke, pressing hard enough to indent the paper. This signature is too light, too careful. Someone was trying to copy his style but didn't understand the mechanics. Is that enough to prove fraud in court? Adrian asked. It's enough to raise serious questions. Whether it's enough to win depends on the judge, and on what other evidence you have. Adrian's jaw tightened. We're working on that. By the second day, they'd assembled a case. Not a perfect one. There were gaps, uncertainties, places where Ashford could still claim innocent mistake, but enough to make him sweat. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Victoria had been quietly interviewing former servants, and she found a maid who'd worked in the Ashford household 7 years ago. The woman was old now, living in a boarding house on the edge of the city, but her memory was sharp. Lord Ashford had money troubles, she said, serving them weak tea in a cramped parlor. Bad investments. His father cut off his allowance, so he started acquiring debts. Acquiring them how? Lillian asked. He'd buy them from creditors, cheap, because most people didn't expect to collect from gamblers and drunks. Then he'd wait, and when the debtor died, he'd go after the family, claim the debts were larger than they were, forge documents if he had to. She shook her head. I left his service because I didn't want to be part of it, but I heard rumors. Other families he'd ruined the same way. Would you testify to this? Adrian asked. The maid hesitated. Lord Ashford is a powerful man, so am I. Adrian's voice was steady. And if you help me, I'll make sure you're protected. A new position, a pension, whatever you need. The maid looked at Lillian, then back to Adrian. You really love her? That girl everyone's been gossiping about? Yes. Even though it's costing you everything. Especially because of that. The maid smiled, tired and sad. Then I'll testify. Because someone should win for love instead of money, even if it's just once. They presented their evidence to Ashford at noon on the second day in the office of a neutral solicitor. Adrian laid out the documents one by one, the handwriting analysis, the payment records, the testimony from the maid, statements from 2 other families Ashford had targeted with similar schemes. This contract is a forgery, Adrian said. The debt was paid 7 years ago. You've been blackmailing me with a fabricated document, just like you've done to at least 3 other families. And if you don't withdraw your claim immediately, I'm taking this to the courts, to the newspapers, to everyone who'll listen. Ashford's face was stone. Lady Beatrice, sitting beside him, had gone pale. "You can't prove intent," Ashford said finally. "I don't have to. I just have to create enough doubt that no judge will side with you, and enough scandal that no family will ever do business with you again." Adrian leaned forward. "You gambled that I'd be too desperate to fight back. You lost." For a long moment, Ashford said nothing. Then he stood, gathering the documents with shaking hands. "Fine," he said. "I withdraw the claim." And I apologize for the misunderstanding." "Not good enough." Adrian's voice was ice. "I want a signed statement admitting the contract was invalid. I want public acknowledgement that the debt was paid, and I want compensation for the distress you've caused my family." "How much?" £5,000. Ashford's face went red. "That's extortion. That's justice." Adrian smiled thinly. "Take it or leave it." Ashford took it. The signed statement was delivered that evening. The money followed 2 days later, and by the end of the week, word had spread through London's elite circles. Lord Ashford had attempted fraud and been caught. His reputation was in tatters. Lady Beatrice quietly ended their association and left the city. Adrian's family was safe, and Lillian realized, with a jolt of disbelief, that they'd won. The celebration at Ravenscroft House was small but genuine. Catherine opened a bottle of wine that had been aging since Adrian's father's time. Before the gambling, before the debts, when the family had still been whole. Victoria played piano while they drank, her fingers stumbling over the keys but her smile bright. "I can't believe we pulled it off," she said. "We almost didn't." Adrian was sprawled in a chair, exhausted but lighter than Lillian had ever seen him. If that maid hadn't agreed to testify— But she did. Lillian sat beside him, their shoulders touching. And Ashford broke. "Because you called his bluff first," Catherine said, raising her glass. "That speech at the gala, about making him look suspicious, that's what rattled him. I was terrified the entire time." "You didn't show it," Victoria grinned. "You looked like you wanted to kill him." "I did want to kill him." They laughed, the sound warm and real and free. For the first time in weeks, there was no immediate crisis, no looming deadline, no impossible choice between love and survival. But as the evening wound down and the others drifted off to bed, Lillian felt a knot of anxiety tightening in her chest. Adrian found her on the terrace an hour later, staring at the dark garden. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Nothing. Everything." She turned to face him. "We solved the immediate problem, but the engagement is still fake. The scandal is still real, and eventually people are going to expect us to either get married or end this." "So we get married." Lillian's heart stuttered. "What?" "We get married." Adrian said it like it was obvious. "We've already survived the worst London can throw at us. We've faced down creditors and blackmailers and society's judgment. Why would we stop now?" "Because—" Lillian struggled for words. "Because this was supposed to be temporary. A performance. You were supposed to move on to someone suitable once the danger passed. You're suitable. I'm a nobody. You're the woman I love." He crossed to her, taking her hands. "Lillian, I don't care about your background. I don't care that you came from nothing. I care that you're brilliant and brave, and you see me, actually see me. Not the title or the money or the legacy. Just me. Adrian, I'm asking you to marry me for real this time. Not because we have to, because I want to." His voice softened. "Do you want to?" She did. So badly it scared her. But there was still one problem. "Your mother," Lillian said quietly. "Victoria, they need you to marry well, to secure the family's future. I bring nothing to this marriage except scandal and—" "Stop." Adrian cupped her face, making her look at him. "My mother already loves you. Victoria adores you. And as for securing the future, we just defeated a man who tried to destroy us using fraud and blackmail. I think we can handle building a life together. What if I'm not enough? What if you are?" Lillian searched his eyes, looking for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign that he was settling. All she saw was certainty. "Yes," she whispered. Adrian's smile was blinding. "Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. For real. Forever." She laughed, dizzy with relief and joy and terror. I'm probably going to ruin your reputation. You already did. And people will always whisper about how I trapped you. Let them. And I have no idea how to be a viscountess. Then we'll learn together. He kissed her, soft and sure. I love you. I love you too. They stood there in the dark, holding each other, and for the first time since that night in the ballroom, when this all started, Lillian let herself believe they might actually survive this. The announcement went out the next week, not in the society pages. Those had been burned too many times. Instead, Adrian sent personal letters to every family they'd allied with, every person who'd shown them kindness during the scandal. The message was simple. The engagement is real. The wedding will proceed. You're invited. The responses ranged from enthusiastic support to icy silence. But there were enough acceptances that Catherine declared the event salvageable. Madame Duval returned to design a wedding dress, this time with none of her earlier condescension. You've earned this, she said, pinning fabric around Lillian's waist. Not many women could have done what you did. I didn't do anything special. You survived. You fought back. You refused to be erased. Madame Duval stepped back, studying her work. That's more than special, chérie. That's extraordinary. The dress was midnight blue, Lillian's favorite color, the color she'd worn to the Ashworth ball. Not white, because white felt like a lie for a marriage that had started as fiction. Blue felt honest, real. Victoria helped with the guest list, carefully vetting names, removing anyone who'd been openly hostile during the scandal. No one gets to celebrate with us if they try to destroy us first, she said fiercely. Catherine handled the ceremony arrangements with military precision, turning what could have been a small, quiet affair into something genuinely elegant. Not ostentatious, they couldn't afford that, but beautiful in its simplicity. And Adrian handled the whispers. There were still people who called Lillian a schemer, who insisted Adrian had been trapped, who predicted the marriage would end in disaster. Adrian met each accusation head-on, never defensive, always matter-of-fact. She didn't trap me, he told Lord Morrison at a dinner party. I pursued her, and if that makes me foolish, so be it. I'd rather be a fool in love than a cynic dying alone. The quote made it into 3 different papers. Public opinion began to shift, slowly, grudgingly, but undeniably. What had started as scandal was becoming a story, the kind of story people wanted to believe in. Love against odds, survival against cruelty. 2 people choosing each other when the world told them not to. Not everyone bought it. There were still detractors, still families who refused to acknowledge them. But there were also invitations, dinner parties, garden gatherings, a slow, cautious reintegration into the society that had tried to exile them. They're hedging their bets, Catherine said one evening, reading through the latest batch of correspondence. Half of London still thinks you're doomed, but the other half is starting to wonder if you might actually make it. Which half are we betting on? Victoria asked. Catherine smiled. Ours. 10. 2 weeks before the wedding, Lady Cecilia Ashford appeared at Ravenscroft House unannounced. Lillian was in the garden when the servant brought the news, and her first instinct was to refuse the visit. But curiosity, and maybe a small amount of vindictiveness, won out. Cecilia looked diminished. Still beautiful, still expensively dressed, but there was something hollow in her eyes, defeated. I came to apologize, she said without preamble. Lillian blinked. I'm sorry? For everything. The threats, the blackmail attempt, Cecilia's voice cracked. The cruelty. I was angry and petty, and I tried to destroy you because I couldn't stand seeing Adrian move on. Why are you telling me this? Because I lost everything. Cecilia sat down heavily on a bench, staring at her hands. My reputation is ruined. My friends have abandoned me. My family barely speaks to me. And it's all because I tried to hold on to something that was never really mine. Lillian wanted to feel triumphant, wanted to savor the sight of her enemy brought low, but all she felt was tired. What do you want from me? She asked quietly. Nothing. I don't expect forgiveness. Cecilia looked up, eyes shining. I wanted you to know that you were right. At the ball, when you said I couldn't stand him moving on. You were right, and I'm sorry. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Lillian said, He never really loved you. You know that, right? Cecilia flinched. I don't mean to be cruel, Lillian continued, but you need to hear it. Adrian loved the idea of you, the perfect match, the beautiful, wealthy bride who would solve all his problems. But he didn't love you, the real you, because you never let him see that person. And you did? I didn't have a choice. I had no money, no title, no mask to hide behind. All I could offer was myself. Lillian leaned back. Maybe that's why it worked. Cecilia stood slowly. For what it's worth, I think you'll make him happy. Happier than I ever could have. Thank you. Cecilia left without another word, and Lillian watched her go, feeling something like closure settling over her. Adrian found her 10 minutes later. I heard Cecilia was here. She apologized. Did you accept? I didn't reject it. Lillian turned to him. Is that enough? Adrian pulled her close. More than enough. The wedding took place on a cold, clear morning in late autumn. The chapel was small, too small for a viscount's wedding, really, but it was the church Catherine had married in, and Adrian wanted to honor that. 60 guests filled the pews, a mixture of family, allies, and people whose opinions Adrian actually cared about. Lillian walked down the aisle alone. She had no father to give her away, no family to stand beside her. But halfway down, Victoria stepped out of her pew and took Lillian's arm, smiling fiercely. You're not doing this alone, she whispered. They walked together. Adrian waited at the altar, eyes bright, smile unguarded. When Lillian reached him, he took her hands and whispered, You're stunning. You're biased. Completely. The ceremony was traditional. Vows exchanged, rings given, pronouncements made. But when the vicar asked if anyone objected, half the guests tensed, waiting for drama. Silence. No one objected. No one interrupted. No scandal erupted. Just two people promising to love each other, and a room full of witnesses who'd decided to let them. When Adrian kissed her, the chapel erupted in applause, and Lillian felt tears streaming down her face. Not from sadness, not from fear, but from pure, overwhelming relief. They'd made it. Against every odd, every obstacle, every person who'd tried to stop them, they'd made it. The reception was held at Ravenscroft House, intimate and warm. Catherine gave a toast that made everyone cry. Victoria played piano. The Duchess of Harrow showed up unannounced and declared the whole affair refreshingly honest. And at midnight, when the last guests had departed and the house had fallen quiet, Adrian and Lillian stood in the garden where they'd had so many whispered conversations, so many moments of doubt. We did it, Lillian said, still not quite believing it. We did. What happens now? Adrian pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. Now we live. Really live. Not survival. Not performance. Just us. That sounds terrifying. Probably, he smiled. But I'm betting we'll be good at it. Lillian kissed him, tasting champagne and promise and the future they'd fought so hard to claim. She still didn't have a fortune. Still didn't have a title that mattered. Still carried the scars of every insult, every rejection, every moment she'd been told she wasn't enough. But she had Adrian. She had a family that had chosen her. She had a place in the world that she'd earned, not through birth or luck, but through sheer, stubborn refusal to be erased. And that, she thought, was worth more than all the wealth in England. The honeymoon lasted 3 days before reality caught up with them. They'd retreated to a small country house Adrian owned in Sussex, modest by aristocratic standards, nearly forgotten by creditors, but theirs. They spent the time walking through overgrown gardens, eating simple meals prepared by the single housekeeper, and learning how to exist together without performance or pretense. On the 4th morning, a courier arrived with a stack of letters. Adrian read the first one over breakfast, his expression darkening, then the second. By the third, he'd pushed his plate away entirely. What is it? Lillian asked. The debts. His voice was flat. We cleared Ashford's fraudulent claim, but the legitimate creditors are still circling. They heard about the wedding, assumed I'd married money, and now they're demanding payment. Lillian's stomach sank. How much? £28,000, due within 6 months. The number hung between them like an executioner's blade. We don't have £28,000, Lillian said. I know. And we can't sell the house. Your mother and Victoria need... I know. Adrian set the letters down, rubbing his face. I thought defeating Ashford would buy us time, space to breathe, but all it did was remind everyone else that I'm still drowning. Lillian reached across the table, taking his hand. Then we figure it out. Together. How? I don't know yet. But we didn't survive this long by giving up. She squeezed his fingers. What assets do we have left? Adrian laughed bitterly. This house, some furniture, a few paintings no one wants, my mother's jewelry, but I'd rather die than sell that. What about the Yorkshire estate, the one your father... Worthless. The land's been fallow for years. No tenants, no income. The only reason I haven't sold it is because no one will buy it. Lillian's mind raced. An estate, land. Even worthless land had value if you knew what to do with it. What if we didn't sell it? She said slowly. Adrian frowned. What? What if we used it? Made it productive again? Lillian, I don't know anything about farming, but I do. She leaned forward, the idea crystallizing. I grew up in the countryside. I worked in gardens, helped with harvests. I know how to coax life out of difficult soil. And if the land's been fallow, it might actually be richer now than when it was overworked. That's insane. So was everything else we've done. Adrian stared at her. You want to move to Yorkshire, to a crumbling estate, and somehow turn it into a working farm. I want to try. Lillian's voice strengthened. Because sitting here waiting for creditors to take everything is what destroyed your father. We need to be different. We need to fight. Even if we fail? Especially if we fail. At least we'll go down swinging. Something shifted in Adrian's expression, fear giving way to something that looked like hope. All right, he said. Let's go to Yorkshire. The Yorkshire estate was worse than Lillian had imagined. The manor house was a Gothic monstrosity, half the windows broken, ivy consuming the south wing like a slow-motion avalanche. The grounds were overgrown, the stables empty, the tenant cottages abandoned and sagging. It looked less like an estate and more like a graveyard for someone's ambitions. Catherine took one look and nearly wept. We can't live here. We don't have a choice, Adrian said quietly. Then we make it livable. Victoria, surprisingly, stepped forward with determination. We've survived worse than this. They moved in 3 weeks later with a skeleton staff, 2 maids, a groundskeeper, and a cook who'd worked for Adrian's grandmother and refused to retire. The London house was leased to a merchant family for income. Catherine's jewelry stayed locked in a vault. Every penny was funneled into making the Yorkshire estate functional. Lillian threw herself into the work with a ferocity that surprised everyone, including herself. She hired local laborers to clear the fields, consulted with farmers about crop rotation, soil quality, market demands, learned which fields could support wheat, which needed barley, which should be left for grazing. She negotiated prices, bartered for seeds, and spent her evenings poring over agricultural journals by candlelight. Adrian worked beside her, learning as he went. He wasn't a natural farmer. His hands blistered, his back ached, and he swore creatively every time a plow jammed, but he didn't quit. Together, they transformed wreckage into something that resembled hope. But hope didn't pay debts. 4 months in, with the first crops barely planted, the creditors sent another letter. Payment was due in 6 weeks. If they couldn't produce £28,000, the estate would be seized. We're not going to make it, Adrian said one night, staring at the ledgers. Even if the harvest is perfect, we won't see profit for months. We'll lose everything before we have a chance to succeed. Lillian wanted to argue, wanted to find another solution, another miracle. But the numbers didn't lie. Then Victoria walked in holding a newspaper. You need to see this. The article was small, buried on page 4, but the headline made Lillian's heart stop. Lord Ashford arrested for fraud. Multiple families come forward with evidence of forgery and extortion. Adrian snatched the paper, reading rapidly. They found more victims, 8 families, all with forged contracts, fabricated debts. Our handwriting expert testified. The maid from his household testified. He looked up, disbelieving. They're calling it the largest fraud case in a decade. What does that mean for us? Catherine asked. It means... Adrian's hands shook. It means every debt Ashford claimed against anyone is under review, including the other creditors who used his methods. If they were working with him, their claims might be invalidated too. Hope flickered, dangerous and terrifying. The investigation took 3 weeks. 3 agonizing weeks where Lillian and Adrian kept working the land, kept planting, kept pushing forward because stopping meant admitting defeat. Then the solicitor arrived with news that felt like a hallucination. 6 of your creditors were linked to Ashford's schemes, he said, spreading documents across the dining table. Their claims have been invalidated. The remaining debts totaled £9,000. Adrian's voice was barely audible. 9,000? Still substantial, my lord, but manageable, especially if your harvest succeeds. 9,000. Down from 28, from 43. From a mountain of inherited disaster that had been crushing them for years. It wasn't freedom, but it was possibility. Lillian felt tears streaming down her face and didn't bother wiping them away. The harvest came in better than expected. Not a miracle. There were fields that failed, crops that withered, plans that collapsed, but enough. Enough wheat to sell at market, enough barley to trade for livestock, enough profit to make the first real payment to the remaining creditors and still have money left for seeds, repairs, wages. Word spread through the county. The Viscount Ravencroft and his unlikely wife were making the impossible work, turning ruins into revenue, showing that aristocratic estates could be more than ornamental. They could be functional. Other landowners started asking questions, visiting the estate, requesting Lillian's advice on crop rotation and soil management. She gave it freely, sharing what she'd learned, building a network of reformers who believed land should produce, not just exist. Adrian watched her transform from invisible companion to someone people sought out, someone whose opinion mattered, and he felt something close to awe. "You're building a legacy," he told her one evening as they surveyed the fields. "We're building a legacy," she corrected. "Together." "No." He turned to face her. "This is yours. I provided the land. You made it live." Lillian shook her head. "I couldn't have done any of this without you believing I could. That's not nothing, Adrian. That's everything." They stood there as the sun set over fields they'd planted together, and Lillian realized something profound. She'd spent her whole life being told she was worthless, that survival was the best she could hope for. But survival wasn't the ceiling. It was the foundation. Everything she'd built since had been hers. Earned, real. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. The reckoning came in the form of an invitation. The Duchess of Harrow was hosting her annual winter ball, the social event of the season where reputations were made and destroyed, where London's elite gathered to see and be seen. The invitation was addressed to Viscount and Viscountess Ravencroft, embossed and formal. Lillian's first instinct was to decline. "We don't need their approval," she said. "No," Catherine agreed. "But showing them what you've become, that's not about approval. That's about victory." Adrian touched Lillian's hand. "It's your choice. We don't have to go." Lillian looked at the invitation, remembering the last time she'd walked into a ballroom full of people who despised her, remembering Lady Cecilia's cruelty, Lord Ashford's threats, the endless whispers and judgments. But she also remembered standing up to them, fighting back, refusing to be erased. "We're going," she said. London had changed in the months they'd been gone. Or maybe Lillian had changed, and London just looked different through eyes that had stopped seeking permission to exist. They arrived at the Duchess's townhouse in a modest carriage. No gilded monstrosity, no footman in elaborate livery, just functional transportation. Lillian wore a gown Madame Duval had made from Yorkshire wool, dyed deep green, elegant but practical. Not a costume, not a performance, just herself. The ballroom fell silent when they entered. Not the hostile silence of before, something different, curious, uncertain. People who'd heard the rumors but didn't know what to believe. The Duchess of Harrow approached immediately, regal and assessing. "Viscountess Ravencroft," she said, "I heard you've been transforming that wreck of an estate in Yorkshire." "We've been trying, Your Grace." "Trying?" The Duchess's eyebrow arched. "My sources tell me you've increased productivity by 40% in 6 months, that you're consulting with other landowners on agricultural reform, that you've turned a liability into an asset." She smiled, sharp and approving. "That's not trying, my dear. That's succeeding." Lillian felt her cheeks warm. "We've had help." "Nonsense. You've earned this." The Duchess turned to address the room, raising her voice. Let me be clear. This woman came from nothing. She was ridiculed, attacked, nearly destroyed by people in this very room. And she didn't just survive, she built something real, something valuable. If that's not worthy of respect, I don't know what is. The silence shifted, uncomfortable, thoughtful. Then Lord Morrison stepped forward. Here, here, he raised his glass. To the Viscountess. May we all have half her courage. Others joined. Not everyone. There were still cold stares, still whispered insults, but enough. Enough that when Lillian and Adrian took to the dance floor, they weren't alone in their defiance. Halfway through the waltz, Lillian saw Lady Beatrice watching from the sidelines. Their eyes met. Beatrice's expression was complicated. Not hateful exactly, but not friendly either. Resigned, maybe. Acknowledging. When the dance ended, Beatrice approached. Viscountess, she said stiffly. Lady Beatrice. I wanted to... Beatrice faltered. I wanted to say that what you've done is impressive. I wouldn't have thought it possible. Thank you. I also wanted to say I'm sorry. For conspiring with Ashford, for trying to manipulate you both, it was... She took a breath. It was beneath me. Lillian studied her, looking for insincerity. Found only discomfort and something that might have been genuine regret. Apology accepted, she said quietly. Beatrice nodded and walked away, and Lillian felt another piece of the past settling into place. The real test came an hour later when a young woman approached Lillian near the refreshment table. She was maybe 20, plainly dressed compared to the other guests, and she looked terrified. Viscountess Ravencroft? Her voice trembled. I'm sorry to bother you, but I heard you used to be a companion. Like me. Lillian's chest tightened. I was. And that you survived something terrible and fought back. I did. The girl's eyes filled with tears. I'm in a similar situation. A man, someone powerful, he's been pursuing me. And I don't know what to do. I have no family, no money, no options. Lillian knew that desperation, had lived it, had nearly been destroyed by it. What's your name? She asked gently. Sarah. Sarah, listen to me. Lillian took her hands. You have options. Maybe not good ones, maybe not easy ones, but you have them. And the first one is this. Don't face this alone. But I am alone. Not anymore. Lillian squeezed her hands. Give me the man's name. Tell me what happened, and I will help you find a way out. I promise. Sarah stared at her, disbelieving. Why would you help me? Because someone helped me when I needed it most, and because no one should have to fight alone. Lillian's voice strengthened. We'll find you a new position, a safe place. And if this man tries to hurt you, we'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person he is. You'd do that? For a stranger? You're not a stranger. You're someone who needs help. That's enough. Sarah broke down crying, and Lillian held her while the ballroom watched, some shocked, some moved, some uncomfortable with the raw display of emotion in their carefully controlled world. Adrian appeared at Lillian's side, understanding immediately. What do you need? A carriage, somewhere safe for Sarah to stay tonight. Done. He turned to a footman. Have our carriage brought around, and send word to Ravencroft House. Prepare a room. Within 20 minutes, Sarah was safely escorted away, and Lillian stood in the ballroom feeling like she'd just crossed an invisible threshold. This was what power actually meant. Not titles or money or social standing, the ability to help someone weaker than yourself. To change outcomes. To rewrite endings. The Duchess approached again, eyes bright. You're not just reforming estates, she said quietly. You're reforming society. I'm just helping one girl. Today. But word will spread. Other women will come to you, and you'll help them too. The Duchess smiled. You've become dangerous, Viscountess. The very best kind of dangerous, sauce. They left the ball at midnight, riding through London's dark streets toward Ravencroft House where Sarah waited. That was bold, Adrian said. That was necessary. People will talk. Let them. Lillian leaned against him, exhausted but steady. I'm done caring what people think. I care about what I can do, what we can do. Adrian kissed the top of her head. I love you. I love you too. They arrived home to find Catherine and Victoria waiting with Sarah in the drawing room. The girl had calmed, wrapped in a blanket, drinking tea that was probably more milk than anything else. We need to find her a position, Lillian said. Somewhere far from London, somewhere safe. Catherine nodded. I have a cousin in Scotland. She's been looking for a companion, someone trustworthy. That's perfect. It's also expensive. Travel, new clothes, references. We'll manage. Lillian glanced at Adrian, who nodded. What's the point of rebuilding our life if we can't use it to help others? They made the arrangements that night. By the end of the week, Sarah was on a coach to Scotland with a letter of introduction, a small purse of money, and instructions to write if she ever needed anything. She wasn't the last. Over the following months, other women found their way to Lillian. Servants escaping cruel employers, companions trapped in impossible situations, girls with nowhere else to turn. Lillian helped them all, finding positions, writing references, occasionally using her growing influence to quietly destroy the reputations of men who preyed on the vulnerable. It became her second legacy, quieter than the agricultural reforms, but just as important. People started calling her the Viscountess of Second Chances. Lillian thought it was ridiculous. Adrian thought it was perfect. 2 years after the wedding, they received an unexpected visitor. Lady Cecilia Ashford arrived at the Yorkshire estate unannounced, traveling alone, looking worn in a way that had nothing to do with age. Lillian met her in the newly restored drawing room, wary but willing to listen. I'm leaving England, Cecilia said without preamble. Moving to Italy, starting over somewhere no one knows my name. I'm sorry it came to that. Don't be. I earned it. Cecilia looked around the room at the simple furniture, the practical decorations, the lack of ostentation. You've built something real here. We've tried. No, you've succeeded. Cecilia's voice cracked. I came to tell you that I was wrong. About everything. About what mattered. About what made someone worthy. She met Lillian's eyes. You were always worthy. I just couldn't see it because I was too busy protecting my own fragile ego. Lillian didn't know what to say. I don't expect forgiveness, Cecilia continued. I just wanted you to know that watching you thrive has been educational. Painful, but educational. She stood. I'll go now. Wait. Lillian stood too. I hope Italy is good to you. I hope you find what you're looking for. Cecilia smiled sadly. I hope so too. She left, and Lillian never saw her again. But she thought about that conversation for a long time afterward, about how pain could be educational, about how even enemies could grow, about how endings could be complicated and messy and still somehow meaningful. 5 years after the fake engagement that had started everything, Lillian stood in the same Yorkshire field she'd transformed, watching the sunset paint the sky gold and crimson. The estate was thriving, the debts were paid, the creditors were satisfied. Catherine's health had improved in the country air. Victoria had married a kind man who valued her intelligence more than her dowry. And Lillian had become someone she never imagined she could be. Not just a viscountess, not just a farmer, but someone who mattered, someone who changed things, someone whose life proved that the circumstances of your birth didn't have to define the scope of your impact. Adrian found her there, as he always did. Thinking? He asked. Remembering. Good memories or bad? Both. She turned to him. Do you ever regret it? Choosing me over someone suitable? Every day? She flinched. I regret, Adrian continued, pulling her close, that I didn't choose you sooner, that I wasted time worrying about what people thought instead of just living. He kissed her forehead. But choosing you, marrying you, building this life with you, that's the only thing I've ever done that I'm completely certain was right. Lillian's throat tightened. We've come a long way from that ballroom. We have. Do you think we would have made it if we'd known how hard it would be? Adrian considered. Probably not. Good thing we were too stubborn to quit. She laughed, the sound carrying across the fields they'd planted together. In the distance, workers were finishing the day's harvest, calling to each other, laughing. The manor house glowed with lamplight. Smoke rose from the cottages where tenant families lived, families who had jobs, security, futures because two people had refused to accept that love and survival were mutually exclusive. This wasn't the life Lillian had been born into. It wasn't the life society had said she deserved, but it was hers, earned through courage and stubbornness and the radical belief that she had value even when the world disagreed. And that, she thought, was the greatest legacy of all. Not wealth, not status, not even happiness, though she'd found that too. The knowledge that she'd taken a lie meant to save her from ruin and turned it into a truth that saved her life. She'd been invisible once? A servant? Nobody's choice. Now she was someone who helped other invisible people become seen. Now she was someone who proved that the stories society told about worth and value and who deserved what were just that, stories. And stories could be rewritten. Adrian's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with the ease of years of practice. "Come on," he said. "Dinner's ready." They walked back toward the house together, leaving footprints in the earth they'd transformed, carrying with them the truth that had saved them both. Love wasn't weakness. It was the most powerful weapon they'd ever wielded. And when you fought with love instead of for it, when you built instead of performed, when you chose the hard right over the easy wrong, you didn't just survive. You changed the world, one second chance at a time.